Wood turning mistakes, frustrations, and potentially serious issues. Hi, I'm Kent and welcome to Turn a Wood Bowl. Today we're going to talk about mistakes, frustrations, and potentially serious issues that affect almost all wood turners and especially beginning wood turners. What are the reasons for these issues? Well, I think one of the main reasons is people just don't talk about these things. Sure, we learn about all of the steps it takes to make a wood bowl, for instance, but there's a lot of things going on in between that if we're not quite certain about, we can make some mistakes and at a minimum, get really frustrated. So in this video, I'm going to share with you many of these things that we all have come across. I know I came across all of these when I started, and you're probably coming across them too now. You might not even realize it. The last two in this video are super important, so stay tuned for those. So let's jump right in and get started. Tell me if this sounds familiar. You've turned a few bowls and you're starting to become a little bit more courageous in making those walls thinner and thinner. Does that sound like something you might have done? I know I did this. The first bowls we make, we usually make the walls really thick. We play it safe and they're really thick and the bowl comes out and it's heavy, but it's a bowl and it looks great. But we all know we want those walls to be thinner. And we keep making them thinner and thinner and thinner until they're really thin and we're really proud of ourselves. Here's where you can get caught up in a bit of an issue that you really need to be aware of. If you've made this bowl very thin and you're down to almost finishing out, what is a very common mistake is to think, oh, I'm not quite happy with that rim. I want to go back up to that rim and fix it or change it or maybe make it a different shape. In doing so, it's very easy to blow apart the entire bowl. Now, why would that happen? When you did the bowls really thick, it was really not a problem because it was dense and it didn't flex much. But the thinner you make those walls, the more flexing occurs and you may not even realize it. It's turning so quickly that you can't see this flex a lot of times unless your piece is very green. And in that case, you might see it actually moving like that. Well, if you have any kind of vibration or movement in your bowl, just a little bit in there, and you bring this stabilized steel tool up to it, guess what's going to happen? You're probably going to blow apart that rim. And what happens is it's usually on the end grain, because if you think of the end grain, it's not being held together super tight. It's almost like a puzzle piece that'll come flying out of there, or you'll just blow the whole thing apart. It happens to everybody. The trick to work around this is thin that wall down, or thin the rim down rather, to the thinnest wall thickness you want, and then work your way down, but don't come back up to the rim. Do that with the center mass still in the inside of the bowl. This is how you see me turn all of my bowls, and this is one of the reasons I do this. That bowl blank has maximum stability when there's mass in the center of it still. So I can take that rim and make it super thin right there. The secret is, once I'm done with that rim and I start removing more material down inside the bowl, I never return to the rim. So keep that in mind. Don't go back up to the rim of a thin bowl because there's a good chance you're going to blow it apart. This next one is a major safety issue. Please do not use spindle tools on your side grain mounted bowl. Now, this might be confusing at first. Let me explain. This is how most bowl blanks appear. This is a side grain mounted bowl. So whether I turn this as a live edge or if I make a bowl out of it this way, this is side grain. How do we know? We have end grain on one side grain, end grain, side grain. That's called a side grain mount. So what's going to happen is the tool is going to be cutting end grain, then side grain, then end grain repeatedly. It is not a smooth transition for a tool to go from end grain to side grain to end grain over and over again. That's why you really need to be using a bowl gouge at all times when you're turning a side grain mounted bowl. Now, let me explain this a little bit further so you understand. And I'm going to pull out the toilet paper. So here's a roll of toilet paper. Spindle tools are designed to make peeling cuts. So think of this as the growth rings of the tree. The spindle tools are designed to simply peel away those layers. So the energy and effort that the tool needs to do is pretty even, and it's not that complicated for this tool to peel that material away. Which, side note, by the way, if you're using a parting tool, it needs to go in at an angle like this so it peels that material away. You don't want to jam this in at 90 degrees. That's not the proper way to make a peeling cut, but that's kind of a side note. So this is a spindle tool. This should never be used on a side grain mounted bowl blank like I just showed you, because it doesn't have the ability to go through the forces of the end grain over and over again. So what we're dealing with and what we're looking at here with this bowl blank is, this is half of this tube of toilet paper here. So what's happening is it's turning like this. So now imagine the tool cutting this. It's going to be hard cutting through this, but then easy here and then hard cutting here. Here's where we really get into trouble as turners. You might have inherited a big pile of tools and you might be thinking, hey, cool, roughing gouge. Well, I'm going to use that to rough out my bowl before I use my bowl gouge, and then I'll use this to finish it. So I'm going to use my roughing gouge to rough that out. So guess what? This is a spindle roughing gouge, and this tool will get you in trouble. This tool is not designed to handle the stress of the end grain, side grain mounted bowl blank stress that I just illustrated there. This tool is designed to peel away material with continuous force. It's not designed to take that end grain energy. And what will happen is this tool will break, usually at the base here. Just out of curiosity, has anybody seen this happen or had that happen to them? Leave me a comment below, because I want to hear from you, and I want you guys to read it, because I get these comments frequently, and there's lots of people that have sent this piece of steel flying through the air, either at them or past them, or even stuck into the ceiling because they use a spindle roughing gouge. Now, how do we know this is a spindle roughing gouge? Here's what you're looking for. The size of the tool itself tapers when it goes into the handle. That is a great indication that this is a spindle tool and not designed for side grain mounted bowls. That is the weak spot, and that's what's going to break right there. Now, there are bowl roughing gouges, and the way you know those is this tool stays the same width all the way down into the handle. The handles are usually massive, really wide and really big, because it's got to take this steel right down into the handle. There are bowl roughing gouges like that, but quite honestly, a larger 5/8 inch bowl gouge can rough out a bowl just as easily as a roughing gouge. I would actually argue that the bowl gouge is actually better at roughing out the tool. So you don't need to buy a bunch of tools. And if you have a spindle roughing tool in your collection, notice that tapered bottom here, be sure not to use it on side grain mounted bowls. There are other tools that you should not be using as well on your side grain mounted bowls, and I've got a video all about that, so check that out. Be safe when you're turning. Don't use spindle tools on side grain mounted bowls. Now this next one, I'm really curious to see if perhaps you went down this road too, because this is very common. We get a lathe and we start turning, we get excited and we start buying exotic blanks like this piece of rosewood. And our first thought is, this is beautiful. I'm gonna make this amazing rosewood bowl that's gonna be spectacular, and I'm gonna be able to give this to somebody as a gift, and it's gonna be fantastic. Here's the problem. What we're not realizing usually when we're first starting out is that we really need to develop our skills and techniques first. That is one of the reasons why wood turning, especially turning wood bowls, is so satisfying and rewarding, is because the gratification is not instant. Think about this for a second, just as a side note as well. Think about how many things in life that you have to work towards, and you have to practice or build up to, and you have to earn the ability to do the thing it is, and how rewarding those are compared to instant gratification things. Well, that's what wood turning is. You probably won't be able to turn this blank into something that looks amazing within your first 10 bowls. You might be able to, but here's what's going to happen. And this is why I want you to kind of embrace that slow pace and the almost like a monk. Think about this as like being a monk, and it's not about instantly getting gratification, but it's the gradual repetition and the practice that you're going to put in. And then when you do turn this, how satisfying that's going to be. Here's what happens a lot of times. We'll start turning a few things, and you might use some cheaper wood, and they turn out good, and then you jump into something like this, something that you've never experienced before. What's going to happen are a few different things. This wood is very dense. That means it's going to cut completely different than pretty much anything else you've turned, unless you've just been turning hard woods to start off with. And what that's going to require is it's going to require you to change your approach to the turning. You're going to have to adjust all of your settings. You're going to need to slow down your pace. You're probably going to need to apply a little bit more pressure, downforce, and guess what? You're going to have to sharpen your tools a lot more. I get this question a lot too, is, well, how in the world do I turn wood that's really hard? It's so hard to turn. Like, well, it's hard to turn because it's very dense. And that's obvious, but the way you do it is you're slow and methodical about it, and you do have to resharpen your tool frequently because your tool is going to become dull as you're turning. So that's just part of the process. And if you've turned a few blanks that were relatively easy, this thing is going to be a struggle. And here's the other thing that happens with these blanks. You might be thinking as you're turning, oh my gosh, this bowl has to be perfect. I spent 30, 40, 50, 60, who knows how much money on this exotic piece of wood. I can't mess it up. Well, don't put that kind of pressure on yourself. I've seen blanks sit like this on lathes for weeks and months because people were intimidated by them, and that's absolutely not what you need. Instead, what you need is you need repetition and you need practice. So find a good wood species that's available around you, preferably something that you can find in the ditch. There's a video all about ditch wood, by the way. And you could just simply go pick some of it up, slice it up, throw it on the lathe, and while you're doing that, you're not going to worry about it. You're not going to be thinking, oh my gosh, I'm out $40 if I mess this up. No, you're going to be practicing and building up your skills and techniques, and you're going to start to feel the way your tools work, so that when you feel the tools against this, you realize how you have to adjust. That's the beauty of wood turning, is you're going to build your skills up, and you're going to have a skill set that is pretty amazing, that is very hard to repeat, and you can't get it instantly. That's the beauty of it. So hold the exotic bowl blanks off for a while, turn 20, 30 bowls, get comfortable doing what you're doing, then experiment on one, and even then find a cheap exotic wood first, and then maybe go into the more exotic, expensive stuff, but really get your skills down first. This one bothered me for a long time, and the solution was so simple, but if you don't know the solution, it's really frustrating, and that's a kickback. Kickbacks typically occur up on the rim. You start the cut, then all of a sudden, your tool gets kicked back. Oh, it's so discouraging. It can also happen in the bottom of the bowl. What makes that happen? I've seen this happen several times too, where you get down to the bottom of the bowl, and then all of a sudden, you get this spiral in the bottom of your bowl because the gouge got kicked back. It's so frustrating. If you're not realizing what causes the kickbacks, then it's going to make it even more frustrating. The reason the kickbacks occur is because of the side grain mounted blank. What happens is we have the end grain over here and here, and the grain runs through the blank like this. Well, as it's rotating, it's making a sweeping motion repeatedly on the tool. And if we have our tool at a 45-degree angle and we introduce it to the edge of the blank, it pushes it back out. because of the grain pattern in the wood. It's really that simple. The quick workaround for this is, instead of leaving our flute open at a 45-degree angle, we close the flute all the way over to the 3 o'clock position. So if the flute being straight up is 12 o'clock, we rotate it to the 3 o'clock position, or 90 degrees to the right, and then we introduce the cut. And I like to introduce a cut very lightly and create like a little shelf before I start the cut. Now, as I begin making the cut, and once I'm into the wood, then I can open up the tool a little bit and maybe more like the 30, 45-degree angle and make that cut as I go across the wood. The other thing you want to do is, if you're working the inside of a bowl, you want to go down, when you get down to the very bottom center, you want to be closing it and bringing it back to that 3 o'clock position. So you can have the flute opened dramatically if you'd like, especially the finishing cuts on the inside of a bowl. It might be opened a lot, but if you bring it down into the bottom of the bowl, guess what's waiting for you down there? The same grain pattern. You have those same lines there. So if the flute is open or like a 45-degree angle, and you have it about a 45-degree angle here, it's going to get swept back, and that's what's going to make those spirals in the bottom of the bowl that you might have seen before. So the way to approach that as you're going down to the bottom of the bowl is to close the tool. So you can do the sides like this at maybe an angle, like a 45-degree angle, but then bring the tool up to that 90-degree angle as it approaches the center and closes that cut without getting kicked back from that side grain. If you're enjoying this video, you might also like my 101 tips, tricks, and secret for turning wood bowls. You want to check that out over at my website, turnawoodbowl.com/shop. All right, we're down to our last 2 tips here. These are super important. The first one that I want to share with you is the supported grain cut. Now, if you're not getting this, or if you're not even aware of what a supported grain cut is, I've got a video right here. You need to check it out. It is a little more detailed than I can get into in this video, but we cover it all in that video, so check that out. It's worth it. This is the way you'll probably realize that you need to understand the supported grain cut. You've turned a bowl and it turns out great, but then you turn another bowl, might even be with the same wood species, and it's super rough and it's got torn out grain, and you're sanding it and sanding it and sanding it and sanding it, which, by the way, when you have torn out grain, you're pretty much not going to sand that out. So think of it this way. If you look at this through a microscope and this is the surface of the wood and you have grains that are pulled out of there, well, they run deep between the other fibers. So in order to get that out so it doesn't look rough, you have to sand all the way down to that broken off grain. And that is not easy to do, and you don't want to be doing that. You want to be doing the minimal amount of sanding, and creating supported grain cuts is the way to do that. It's super, super important to understand this. So if you're having that kind of randomness you're seeing where one bowl looks great and smooth and you barely had to sand it, but then you have another one that's super rough with torn out end grain, you're probably not getting the supported grain cut direction going properly. Let me show you a visual that helps illustrate this. This is a side grain mounted blank. This is exactly the same as the blank that I showed you here. The grain is running through this. So if this is mounted to the lathe like this, what we want to be doing is we want to be cutting from when we're doing the exterior, we want to be cutting from the base of the bowl up to the rim. When we're doing the interior, we want to go from the rim down to the center of the bowl. Now, I know you're going to be asking me this, well, what about an end grain mounted blank? This is side grain. Most bowls typically are side grain. Most of the bowls you see me do here are side grain mounted bowls. But if you were to do an end grain bowl where the grain's running this way through the blank and it's mounted to the lathe, well, on the exterior of that, you actually go from the rim down to the bottom, and in the interior, you go from the bottom up, which is a little bit trickier, and we're not going to get into all that right now. But this would be an end grain mounted blank, and this is a side grain mounted blank. Most of the bowls are mounted like this. So check out that video about the supported grain cut. It's super important to make sure you're making supported grain cuts all the time so that your wood is as smooth as possible without having to sand it very much. This last one is super important as well, and I get asked this a lot. I've got a big chunk of wood that I want to make bowls out of. How long do I need to wait to let that dry? you really don't want to wait to let that dry. Wood turning, unlike woodworking, is completely backwards and different. If you have freshly cut green wood, you want to get that on the lathe as fast as you can and turn it. Now, why in the world would you want to do that? Let's think about this for a second. If we're doing a woodworking project, maybe we're building a cabinet, we would never use wet wood. If we used wet wood and built a cabinet and we got everything put together, glued up, maybe even painted somehow, it'd be wet, the thing is just gonna fall apart because it's gonna warp and twist and expand and contract and just break all of the joints, and it's gonna be a mess, right? A lot of us come to wood turning with that mentality, and it's exactly the opposite. If you take a big log or a chunk of wood and you just leave it somewhere thinking it's going to dry so that it'll be ready to turn, you're most likely going to be left with a big chunk of firewood. Here's what's happening. You need to think of that chunk of wood as produce, just like produce at the grocery store. The older it gets sitting out, the worse condition it's going to have. If you have a freshly cut tree, that is going to make the most beautiful bowl as soon as it's cut versus letting it sit around. Why? Well, it's going to rot. The end grains are going to dry out. They're going to dry out, they're going to crack, and when they crack, they let in more moisture, which is going to continue the cracking, so it's going to crack all the way through, depending on the tree species. There's certain species that may not crack as much, but even if it doesn't crack, you've most likely got little critters in there, and if they're not in there yet, they're going to get in there, and they're going to start eating all those delicious sugars that are inside that log. They basically are designed to decompose that log and turn it back into the earth. It's never going to stay static in one condition. So at the moment a tree comes down, if the tree's in good condition and you can get a section of it, that's when you want to get it and use it. The best way to do that is to cut it down to a length that you can use and rough turn it so that you do a twice turning. Now, why would you do that? Well, twice turning, which I've got several videos on that, go through my playlist over at my YouTube channel and check that out. You can see all the different twice turned bowls there. What's happening is you rough turn it once and then it may distort or change shape a little bit as it's drying. But guess what? It's cut evenly, so it's going to dry relatively quick and it's not going to crack, and bugs really don't like them when they've been once turned, so you're probably not going to have too much bug infestation. Then once that's dried, which if you've had a chance to check out my Tree to Bowl Understanding Green Wood course over at my website, which I highly recommend, we go into all of this in great detail, and I'm going to teach you exactly how to not get cracks in your bowl blanks and how to process wood properly. Whether you're using just a few logs or if you're going to take down a massive tree, I'll show you exactly how to do that in that course, so check that out. So once the rough turn bowl is dry, which there's no such thing as dry wood, it's actually equalized, and we cover all of that in the course too. Once it's equalized, then we can put it back on the lathe and true it up. That means we turn it and it's perfectly circular, and it's going to be that way pretty much forever. And once you've done that, it's not going to warp or distort at that point. It's going to look fantastic. That is how we really want to process wood. So if you have the ability to get your hands on green wood, turn it. Don't let it sit around. Get it on your lathe as fast as possible. And if you can't get it on the lathe, or if you have a ton of it, maybe you have an entire tree or multiple tons of it, then there are different ways of processing it so that you can do it in such a way that you're not getting cracks and you're not having a lot of bug issues in that. And we cover all that in the course too, so check it out. Just know that for wood turning, we do not want to wait and dry our wood. We want to get it on the lathe, and we actually prefer turning green wood first. So which of these tips was the most eye-opening for you? Was it not to use spindle tools on your side grain mounted bowls? Was it waiting to do exotic wood later until you've developed your skills or techniques, or was it one of the other ones? Do me a favor, leave me a comment below and let me know what you learned from this video and how you're going to apply it in your turning now. And also, while you're down there, click that like button. Thank you. And remember to subscribe and click that bell so you're notified each time a new video comes out. All right, guys, as always, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, happy turning.